I believe that what we're seeing with the footage from Space Shuttle mission STS-48, that we are seeing several intelligently controlled extraterrestrial craft. And yes, I do believe that the flashes are the firing of some very, very top secret weapon which is able to produce an electronic or electromagnetic plasma kind of death ray that is being used against these UFOs. I do believe that that is exactly what we're seeing.
The tether has broken. It is going away from us. Get it on the TV. TV. The tether has broken. Copy.
Space Shuttle mission STS-75, the tether incident. A lot has been said about this incident. Personally, I feel that most of the objects that you see are actual individual parts of the tether, just floating around in space, and that they're out of focus. It's a fascinating piece of footage, and I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't, quite a few UFOs coming into the scene to check out our technology, just the same as they've done many times before.
The crew can see the tether and see the satellites. It's beautiful. This view showing the satellite. Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
Okay. What else did Phil tell you that was interesting in those private moments?
Well, he showed me, of course, his scars, which were obvious.
They're on the video.
They're on the video.
Right.
There's nothing unusual about that. But he told me about one of his encounters in the underground when we were doing a bore for preparation to build an underground base. They said the typical procedure was they bored a large diameter hole, large enough to run a captain's chair down through. It was about 6 feet or so in diameter. And it could be earth boring, it could be laser, it could be whatever. But they bore this hole down, he says, anywhere from 1 to 3 miles. The goal typically was between 1 and 3 miles, no less than 1 mile. But his job was, when they had it down to the depth they wanted, he would go down on the captain's chair, literally, physically down in the borehole, and examine the rock structure at the bottom to see if it was a kind of rock structure that would be possible to use to create by blasting their underground base. He says more than once it happened that as they were boring, they hit an open area, an underground cavern system. And he was dropped down, the first one of these, where it happened that way, he was told get on the chair and go down and find out what's down there. Well, I took lighting with him. He said he didn't know what to expect.
Is this the Dulce-Wars you're going to talk about?
No, this was before the Dulce-Wars.
So there was another one.
This has nothing to do with Dulce-Wars.
Ah.
This is in his standard procedures of building the underground bases.
Wouldn't it get hot? I mean, I could imagine if you're being lowered down 3 miles.
No, this is another great misconception. I've done a lot of spelunking in my life, and this is one of the strange things they tell you. In all of the natural caves and natural cavern systems, they are the same temperature the world over, averaging around 52 degrees Fahrenheit, night or day, summer or winter. They vary maybe plus or minus 2 degrees from that. But they hold right around 52, and regardless of the depth, they're still 52 degrees. Now you say, well, what about volcanoes? They have a special structure, and apparently the volcanoes, of course they're hot. You got molten rock. But there's no truly accurate theory to explain why you have volcanoes with all this molten lava, which is assumed to come from the center of the earth. It does not. Why we have volcanoes is still something of an unexplained mystery, and even Phil couldn't come up with an answer on that one. But he went down on this one case on the chair.
So this was before the Dulce-Wars.
This is before the Dulce-Wars.
Okay.
You go down to the chair and go down to the lift, get out of the chair. It's wandering around in a very dim cavern system, very foul air. Apparently sort of breathable, but very foul air. And with his lighting, he looked around there, and he thought he saw a shadow or something moving. He wandered around one of the corners of this cavern system, was face to face with an alien. He said he looked at it looked at him. If I remember correctly, he described it as a reptilian. But he says it went for something on his chest. It had some kind of a plaque or thing on his chest.
Now, he describes this story on
the
but
he said he pulled out his 9mm Ruger that he had in his pocket. He wasn't supposed to have in his suit, but he had a hunch to take the gun with him that day, and he did, and he shot this thing dead before it got him. He said this happened more than once.
Well, I thought this was the Dulce-Wars you're talking about, because he said that 60 or so soldiers actually got killed in that exchange.
In the exchange in the Dulce-Wars and the Dulce Tunnel, but this was a totally separate phenomena. See, when he was talking about exploring, this is when I'm saying private conversations.
Okay.
He was exploring these caverns when they hit them. When he went back up finally and told them what happened, he said he got the impression that they knew all about it. And he says eventually he learned the government knew where these underground caverns were and that they were inhabited.
So how is that experience different from what the Dulce-Wars were?
The Dulce-Wars was going into a base they already knew, already had. It was originally a government base. It was turned over to the aliens. And they took it over completely and eventually kicked out the scientists, wanted to run it entirely on their own. The government wanted it back, and this was in New Mexico, of course, and of my understanding of the history of it, it was originally built as a storage depot for nuclear waste. Mm-hmm. But the governor of New Mexico at that time says, you're not dumping that nuclear waste here in an underground facility in New Mexico. You're not going to use it for that, even though it's already been built for that purpose. Eventually, it was adopted for the I guess what one would say the underground labs and experimentation, which took place at Dulce. The aliens were invited in. They more or less took it over and then eventually totally took it over. But the attempt to get it back from the aliens is some 66 people went in fully armed, or they thought fully armed, and only 4 or 5 total came out. Phil was one of those that came out alive, all injured. Had to be carried out by Marines they brought in just to carry them out, and even the Marines were hit. And he recovered slowly. He had severe burn marks. He had a hole in his chest and other burns.
So that's a different experience.
Totally separate from what
than the one he talks about with the alien who shot him
single
in the chest.
one-on-one where he shot them. So Dulce was not one-on-one. This was a known number of aliens at the other end of the tunnel,
right.
Costing 66 people, including most military, heavily armed, or they assumed they were adequately armed,
right.
And literally took all of the military out. They had weapon systems we did not have at that time.
Yeah. Now, did he ever say he was physically on board a UFO or ET craft?
I do not recall that he ever mentioned that, no.
Okay. Was there anything else that was bizarre that he shared with you?
Yes, he did. If you get into the period after he left the government, he remained, as he said, quiet for about 2 years, 2.5 years, didn't talk publicly. He took his oaths of secrecy seriously and wouldn't discuss any of what he had done. But then he started talking a little trial bits, you might call it, trial balloons, at the club that was there, the Western Bigfoot Club. And I talked with him. Eventually he realized, I said, the public should know some of this. So I kept twisting his arm to go public, and he did. During this whole period, he was visited periodically by various people from his old group and from the government, from intelligence. Hey, we don't like what you're doing. You shouldn't be taking this public. We'll forgive you everything if you just come back and work for us.
And he told you that?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And he said this went on repeatedly. He says finally, after his trip to Japan, and when he came back, he said some fairly high-level intelligence people came to visit him as an apartment in Oregon, in Portland area. Mm-hmm. And discussed with him that says, we want you to know, Mr. Schneider, you have done a great deal of damage to, let's say, the whole infrastructure, a great deal of damage to the New World Order.